Jihan Merlin. I'm the head of immigration strategy for Alma. I'm a practicing immigration attorney. I've worked for over 10 years in mostly big law, immigration law. And I joined Alma last year and I'm helping with various tasks, but it's been a really wonderful journey working with the legal team and the product team and the business development side of things. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Jihan. Jihan is truly a well-known immigration attorney. Do you remember when we went to one of the conferences, someone walked up to you and you said, like, aren't you the Jihan who wrote this non-proton and which was circulated at another law firm? And everyone said, like, this is so well written, everyone should read it. It's like, yes, that's that Jihan. So a famous expert Jihan. And I am Aizada, CEO and founder of Alma, also attorney by education and training. Many years I did not practice immigration law, but I've been practicing immigration law, learning a lot about immigration law for the past 3 years since we've started Alma. Alma is a modern immigration law firm built for high growth companies. We focus on speed, we focus on care, and because it was started based on my horrible immigration experience. Being an immigrant, I left the country twice. The third time, a mistake of immigration attorneys left me unable to work for 1.5 years. And this was so significant in my life that I started a company around it so that people get better experience than I did in the past. And also during that experience, I've understood that it's not only about the employees who go through the process, but it's about the companies. I was so grateful to all the companies that wanted to support my immigration, but it was also difficult for them. During this entire process, they didn't know what to expect, how long it's going to take, should they hire temp if I cannot work. So companies are in this together with immigrants, and all of you actually help immigrants have a better life in the United States. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Today, we'll be focusing on basically immigration one-on-one, and that's about like what you can do now to build immigration program that scales as the company scales. So with that, I will start sharing my screen. And so this practical session is dedicated to people in HR, people ops, immigration program, that essentially everyone who is protecting compliance, reducing employee anxiety, and keeping hiring velocity intact. What this webinar will help you build, what we will go over today. First, we will understand the map, basically like what you need to know in terms of the visas in order to make sound decisions. The second, we will focus on how to define ownership, because there are so many stakeholders and they're also your outside counsel. So how to define ownership and who does essentially what. And the third one is how to build an operating system, how to put compliance, employee experience, SLAs, and everything that goes around immigration into a scalable rhythm. And then we will also, hopefully at the end of this webinar, you will leave with action items. What you do in the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days in order to tighten risks, improve visibility, and improve the stakeholder alignment. And of course, we will focus on US employment-based immigration. And we will also dedicate around 10 to 15 minutes towards the end for your questions. You can, in the meantime, put your questions in the questions, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. So now I'll give the word to Jihan, who will actually explain you what really matters, what visas you need to know about.
Thank you so much for teeing that up so well, Aizada. So I'm looking at the attendee list and I see we have a lot of different faces. Some of you I know from the industry and you have several years of experience in the global mobility immigration landscape. So this is going to sound like a review to you. Others joining us are newer to immigration. And so we're just going to take a little bit of time to explain some of the more common visa pathways for people who might be joining a company and require sponsorship. So number one, I say like number 1 and 2 visa types are individuals that you'll see at your company who may require visa sponsorship. First of all, look at your international student population. So F1 holders, there's something called optional practical training. That's something that allows students to work in a field related to their studies somebody after graduation. And there are some restrictions on that. Typically, it's 12 months for somebody after they graduate. And if they hold a STEM degree, they can extend it for up to an additional 2 years. During that time, once that period runs out, there's generally not an option to renew it in F1 status because their program has already ended. So what companies typically do is if they have a student hire, they'll consider sponsoring them for another visa type before their F1 maxes out. And the most common pathway for doing that is something called an H-1B visa. Typically, this requires going through something called the H-1B cap lottery process. The company will register the person in the lottery, and if they're selected, they can apply, they can file this petition. The H-1B visa is a specialty occupation visa. It's for individuals who are working in a field that requires a bachelor's degree and who hold a bachelor's degree or equivalent or higher in a field related to the specialty occupation. So it's not something that's available to every job out there, but for professional occupations, there's a number of them. Those are going to be potentially eligible for the H-1B, but they still need to be selected typically in the lottery. There are exceptions to that. For instance, certain nonprofit teaching institutions, places of higher education may be exempt from the H-1B cap, and research institutions. If they are able to get a cap exempt H-1B, though, they may require sponsorship in the cap in the future were they to move to another company. So that's sort of advanced immigration. But just because somebody has an H-1B, you want to find out if it's on a cap exempt, if they've been through the cap before. E3 is a specialty occupation similar to the H-1B for nationals of Australia. It doesn't require the lottery. H-1B1 is for Chilean and Singaporeans, also doesn't require the lottery, but the requirements are essentially the same. The L1 visa is for intercompany transferees. Those are for individuals who have worked with a company abroad for at least 365 days while physically outside of the U.S. and who are coming to the U.S. to work in either a specialized knowledge or a managerial or executive role with the company. And typically there's a maximum period of 5 years if they're working in a specialized knowledge capacity, or 7 years for managers and executives. So H-1Bs also have a max out of 6 years total on the H-1B. You can potentially extend that if your employee reaches specific milestones in their green card process, but that is the max out date. L1s really have a hard max out date. So, and then O1s it's an extraordinary ability visa. That tends to be an option for a very small subset of visa holders. However, it is worth considering if they're not able to get the H-1B, if you just want potentially more flexibility, look at whether a person's background might make them eligible for an O1. You have to meet certain criteria, and the person's background in totality has to show that they've reached essentially among the top of their field of endeavor. The nice thing about the O1 is that it can be extended indefinitely. It does allow more flexibility with respect to job changes. The TN is for Canadians and Mexican professionals in certain professions that are designated by treaty. That is a great option for Canadian nationals. So again, a lot of this is reviewed to many of you, but I just wanted to lay out the most common pathways. There are others that aren't listed here, but this is sort of just the basics. I think we can move to the next slide.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to say that for people teams, what you should remember is that you don't have to memorize every legal test. You just need to understand, and have pattern recognition to escalate early and to route cases correctly. So in this page, you see the category, when is it used, and what HR should watch for. So it's like you just need to have that pattern recognition, but you don't need to become an expert in every single visa. That's why immigration law firms exist. But that's basically just wraps this page. And then
Yeah.
let's move on to the second one.
Great point. I just wanted to talk for a minute about some common scenarios that you'll see. And one of the most common is what we talked about a few minutes ago with F1, with international students, F1 OPT. They only have so much time on the F1, so what are you going to do when they run out of time? Often that means switching them to an H-1B if they can be selected in the cap. So that is a really common pathway for F1s. My advice is to register them early and often because there's no guarantee that they are going to be selected. And in this current environment, there's a lot of changes happening in both the F1 space and in the H-1B space. And we're not going to talk about all immigration law updates that are happening, but finding an alternate pathway for your international students has become pretty a big priority for a lot of companies. So do consider F1 to H-1B. At the same time, I talked about that 6 year max out for H-1Bs. Well, if you sponsor them for an employment-based green card, and actually, I probably should have done these slides in reverse. We're going to have a slide about the green card process and talk about what the most common pathways are. But if you reach certain milestones, specifically having either an approved I-140 or their perm filed a year before their max out, they can extend their H-1B potentially while waiting for their priority date to become current. So that is a really common pathway. Another is we talked about the L1, the intercompany transferees, that there were two types. The L1B, specialized knowledge. Those individuals typically also will want to transfer to another visa type at some point because they only have 5 years total on the L1B. Sometimes they're able to switch to an L1A if they become a manager, but they still, the L1A even has a 7 year max out. So it's a total of 7 years in the US for those people. So you really want to think about their long-term options. Typically that might mean considering sponsoring them for an H-1B. So that's just laying the groundwork there. L1A visa holders might have other options available. If a person was a manager or executive with the company abroad and is a manager or executive with the company in the US, they might qualify for an EB1C multinational manager green card process. That is essentially the fast track green card process. In the EB1 category, we're going to talk in the next slide about what EB1, EB2, EB3 are, but that is a faster pathway and it allows them potentially to have, like I said, a path to work long term in the US. The other common scenarios, there's some different ones. F1s, some of these PhD holders might be a good fit for an O1A visa. And so you might want to consider sponsoring them for that. If they hold an O1A visa, there's another type of green card process. And sorry, not just if they have an O1A visa, but some people who are good candidates for an O1A extraordinary ability visa may also be good candidates for an extraordinary ability EB1 green card process. The bar is much higher, but it might be an indication, especially people who have a really strong background. And then, we're probably not going to get too much into the weeds on J1s and H1s, but there are a bunch of other pathways that you might see come up.
Sounds good.
Great. Green card planning. I would say, green card scenarios fall into three basic buckets. There's the majority of individuals who go through the employment-based green card process have to go through something called perm or labor certification. That's essentially a process it's run by the Department of Labor, and it requires the company to obtain a prevailing wage, to pay the prevailing wage for the occupation based on DOL data, what people normally make for that occupation in the area of employment. But more famously, it requires the company to go out into the world and advertise for the offered role. And there is a number of different steps, but they have to test at the end there's no qualified, willing, available U.S. workers. And that's the first step in that green card process. It's a really long process, and I'm really oversimplifying it, but it could take up to 2 years or more to go through just the perm process. And then after that, the green card process is a 3-step process. So there's the perm labor certification if you need it. There are exceptions that we'll talk about next. Then there's the I-140 immigrant petition. That's essentially paperwork filed with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service that the company continues to offer the role, has the ability to pay, the person qualifies. That gets filed when the person's priority date is current. And we're not going to get too much into like visa bulletin and priority dates, but basically when it's their turn to adjust status based on when their perm or I-140 was filed and their country of birth, they can then move to the final stage in the process, which is the green card application itself. Typically, that's an I-485 form filed with USCIS. Alternatively, they can go through a consular path. So the exceptions to perm are something called an EB1 process. It could be for extraordinary ability, EB1A, outstanding researchers, EB1B, or the multinational managers that we talked about, EB1C. That's in the EB1 category. The wait times tend to be less based on the visa bulletin than going through an EB2 or EB3 perm-based process. There's also something called called a national interest waiver, which has been a increasingly popular type of filing, but also more scrutinized, potentially because of that. That is a job that requires an advanced degree. It has to qualify for the EB2 category, or the person has their record qualifies them for as a person of exceptional ability. And separately, the position, the field of endeavor is in the U.S. national interest. It has substantial merit and national impact. And if you have a candidate in certain roles, a lot of times it can be in industries like medical or research, but there's a number of different applications for national interest waiver. So do consider it if you're considering green card sponsorship, but that bypasses the perm process as well. So EB1 and EB2 national interest waivers bypass the perm process. Those are just some basics. It's a lot of information when you're thinking about green card pathways, but my general advice is the same as what Aizada said, which is you don't need to know all of this. All you need to know is that there are options in various ways, and and to go to your attorney and actually assess what those may be for your particular candidate. Is there anything you'd add to that, Aizada?
Yes. No, I think this is a good wrap, and maybe we move on to the next slide here. Thank you. So, what do we want to talk about next? So, if the visas that we've just talked about, for you just to understand, have a pattern recognition, but not to know all the details because you have an immigration vendor. The second one is about defining ownership, making sure that everyone has a clear role, and then there's lower friction. So, the message of this page is people ops should not carry the whole program, because what are we seeing is that people ops teams usually have many other responsibilities in addition to immigration. And the last thing you want is to become an immigration attorney. So the best model is that not that the HR people ops team does everything and illegal firm files the forms. It's actually about the clear accountability. And we will share how it actually should be shared. What people ops teams own? You own the sponsorship policy and business rules because that has direct impact on the business. So you need to make sure that all the stakeholders are aligned about this. The business context, the stakeholder alignment about immigration program, about the future of the company, that's on you. Internal communications and escalation decisions, again, on you because it's all concerning internal. Vendor performance review, that's what you own. And you need to make sure that anytime if your leadership asks about how our vendor is performing, you know the exact metrics, that's what you own. And then budget approval and changes along the line, that's something you also own. And what's your immigration law firm, your legal provider owns? They own the case strategy and legal feasibility. If you're considering someone for some sort of visa, they need to tell you what's the strategy and whether they can actually do it. They also own SLAs, filing quality, and outcomes. So they need to proactively communicate to you about all the deadlines, if there are any concerns with the quality of the petition and what are the outcomes. They also need to own everything about compliance, PAF, LCAs, work authorization and stay, prevailing wage review, all of it that's within the purview of the law firm. You want to know all of this, but this is what the law firm owns. The other thing they own is employee case updates and document collection. Keeping your employees informed and giving them updates about the case, collecting all the documents for them, it's their job as well. Regulatory changes translated into action. Right now, we're living in a world that's like, they're constantly news, and there's so many news. Remember, you don't have to become a legal expert. It's your law firm's job to translate it in simple language and just basically tell you what it means for you as an employer, what it means for your employees, and what action items you need to take. That's also owned by your law firm. Helping with workforce strategy, planning, and budgeting. If your law firm is not doing it, are they even your partner? Because they need to help you out. For example, for next year, you're planning for H-1B. What's your workforce strategy? How many people you have on F1? What's the strategy about them? Okay, like these are the people that have 3 years. Let's start, submitting them for H-1B. These people only have 2 years. This these people have 1 year. What we gonna do? You need to know everything in advance, and that should a proposal should come from your immigration law firm, and then you own the decision because that's a business decision. And then training of all the stakeholders, because what I hear a lot is that you have so many stakeholders. Of course, one of your most important stakeholders is your employees, but you also have all the HR recruiters, you have business unit managers, and to make sure that they're all properly trained and they know how to interact with people team that owns immigration. That's also something that the immigration law firm can help you with. And then of course, representation during the site visits and audits. Right now we're living in a world where site visits are more frequent, audits are more frequent, and this is when you can rely on your immigration vendor that they should represent you, and they need to make sure that you pass audits and site visits with flying colors. And then where is the shared rhythm? So usually in the best setup is that you have weekly risk review for active matters. If it's like if anything's slipping through, maybe they're VIP cases, or maybe, like someone is running out of status soon, and like your immigration law firm flags it to you, like this is something that you're tracking together with immigration law firm. Monthly business reviews of vendor metrics. Vendors should come prepared for monthly business reviews and basically have to tell you how the law firm is doing on the metrics. And then they should also let you know, it's like, hey, like workforce strategy, right? Like these other people are expiring in the next 8 months, and then you have a discussion about it. Workforce strategy and planning, as I already said, they own it, but this is a shared rhythm where they bring it to you and then you make a decision on it. Policy exceptions document at once. It's like you need to work with your immigration law firm together and need to make sure that you actually have all the policy exceptions documented once, so that everyone at the law firm can just quickly turn to them, so that no knowledge should just accumulate in one person that becomes a bottleneck. You need to make sure everything is documented and everyone has access to it. And of course, shared rhythm is when you have a program dashboard, actually, where a lot of things that legal provider owns, you can actually see on a dashboard, and then you can have better control and better visibility. And then practical implication of it means that people ops teams, they need to know what's happening and they need to be able to explain the policy. But a good vendor should reduce the operational vendor rather than create it. And as you see, this is an ideal world. This is how all the immigration law firms should behave and be a partner for you, is that there should be less operational burden on you, more so on them, so that you can actually do all the other things that you're responsible for. And then moving on to the next page is how we define the immigration program excellence, 3 dimensions. And this has been put together having talked to so many companies and what the ideal state looks like for everyone. So a strong immigration program, what you need to remember, is not only compliant immigration program, but also it holds up across 3 tests. First is like compliance and control. Is the program legally sound, consistent, and audit ready, right? Because at any given time, if there is an audit, you don't want to expose your company to any liability, right? Like that's super important, and that's what you own and you're responsible for. You need to make sure that all the expiration tracking, and if you're tracking in spreadsheets, I have bad news for you. This is already 2026. Your company expects not only spreadsheets, but also how can you quickly verify all the numbers that you have in spreadsheets? Do you actually have source documents for everything that you have in a spreadsheet? If you're saying someone is expiring next year, can you quickly, within seconds, verify? That's what's expected. You have all the LCA path hygiene, you have codified sponsorship policy, all of it is within the first, like compliance and control. You can report on your program, you have control of it. The second one is essentially managing your most important stakeholder, which is your employee. Do employees feel informed, supported, and confident in the process? Because if not, they'll escalate. And if they escalate, it doesn't look so good on you, right? So it's like, how do you make sure that employee experience is stellar at your company? Because at the end of the day, I know all of you are in this profession and career because you care for people. So that's why it's like it just ties up nicely. Some people that you care for, they should feel informed, supported, and confident in the process. So usually it just means that there's proactive communication. They know what's happening. They have self-serve access. A lot of things they can just like check out for themselves without ever bothering you. And then the third one is the executional architecture. Does the program run smoothly and scale without breaking? And this includes vendor management, stakeholder alignment, and program intelligence. We will now dive into each one of these 3 dimensions so that you get a clear picture of what is this. So the first one, it's about compliance and control, right? Like we all know that compliance just breaks quietly. So I'm giving back word to you, Jihan.
Okay, sounds good. So, wow, you took the words right out of my mouth. So, I don't think we need to spend too much time on this slide, but I guess I want to start by saying that when you come into a function, when where you suddenly are responsible for a population of sponsored foreign nationals, you have to know what the cardinal rules are. And the first thing that I tell people, the first thing that I learned in immigration is you got to keep people in status. So you have to track, there has to be a means of tracking their expiration dates. And that really is one of the chief responsibilities of your immigration vendor. So you want to have eyes on your program. They should be providing the reporting. They should be providing the dashboard to see that. But absolutely, that is the number one thing that keeps people up at night, expiration tracking, making sure people don't fall out of status. And having that data, having visibility into that is super important. So if you're providers, it's just, I don't want to say, some people like spreadsheets, some people like something that is more dynamic, but make sure you have something that you're comfortable working with, that you have visibility over your program. I-9 verification. I just talked to somebody this morning who's a global mobility professional, been working for decades in the field, and she started a new job last year or the year before. And the scariest thing that she saw immediately was that the company was not doing I-9 re-verifications properly. And specifically, they were re-verifying the I-9s for individuals who were sponsored by the company, but not ones that didn't require sponsorship. So dependent work authorized statuses like H4 EADs or L2s, they don't require sponsorship, but you still need to re-verify them. DACA, TPS, those kinds of things. So understand sort of like the full universe of what I-9 verification requires. When you come into a program, there are some little scary things. An I-9 audit, periodically can be really helpful in alleviating that kind of, it's in the back of your mind, stress, because it's always possible that you get a government issued audit and then you have to produce the I-9s, and if things aren't done correctly, if not they're not documented well, that could be a problem. So similarly, there is labor condition applications and public access file maintenance. So the LCAs are part of the H-1B process. E3s, H-1B1s typically are the ones where you see LCAs. And when you sponsor those visa categories, you also have to maintain the public access files for those individuals, which contain the certified LCA and some other required documentation. Some companies traditionally have actual physical files with the paths in it. And that was the way that it's been done for years, but increasingly companies are moving into electronic path systems, and it's so much easier to find things and manage things. And another benefit is now service providers can help you manage your paths. So there are services, you might have heard of Laborless. There are some law firms, Alma does this, where we'll actually manage your paths for you. It's one of those things where it's good to, whatever you choose, whether you're doing it yourself, physical files or electronically, you really need to know where those files are. If you get a site visit from USCIS, you have to be able to locate the path and make sure that all the documents are accurate. So and ideally they have to represent any changes to the work, to the position. So if a person changes job, they're going to need a new H-1B potentially, or if they change location, they might need an amendment, and the path would need to be updated for that. So periodic audits of your paths as well can also be helpful. Sponsorship policies are another area where if you are growing your immigration program, the sooner you can set up your sponsorship policies, the better. I mean, it's not just about who the company sponsors, but also things like, who do you do premium processing for? How do we handle travel? What do we require from our employees before they change roles? rules, work site changes, and things like that? Is everybody aware? Is there a policy for what happens when somebody asks to work remotely or travels internationally and wants to work abroad? So a lot of companies do this sort of ad hoc, but it's really important to have a sponsorship policy in place as your immigration program grows, and frankly, just in general in the HR function. So work with your immigration provider. They should be able to help draft the sponsorship policies with you and make sure that everything is compliant and that you're covering your bases.
Just one more thing to add is that, what happens is that a lot of, people ops or HR teams or mobility teams that handle immigration, it's like if their population is growing so fast and then, people who are on visas, they're just getting like promotions, changes of their jobs. Like a person, for example, was on a TN and then they got promoted twice and no one is tracking it. That's a huge red flag because most likely it's not tied to the original TN anymore, right? So it's like no one was tracking if this needs amendments and whatnot. So these are the problems that you run into. So that's why it's like early on establishing a policy, sharing with all the business unit managers is like basically their checklist. Before you promote someone on a visa, you must talk to immigration, like so that they know what is their checklist before they do anything with immigration population, because down the line you have to manage all the risks. So now we will move on to the building blocks, the employee experience. Jihan, you want to just cover it briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also, before we move very quickly to this next slide, I also want to point out something Patricia Hansen mentioned in the chat around unannounced site visits. So this is just, you know what, this is something that we're actually going to cover in another slide. So I'm thinking as I'm talking, we're going to cover this specific scenario. But thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing this in the chat because it's something that's really important. So we're going to talk about some pitfalls and specific scenarios. So employee experience is another pillar of immigration program management and managing employees that require sponsorship. So I feel like there are different ways of looking at employee experience. It's their communication. Is there a single point of contact? Who is responsible for contacting them about their immigration cases? Who do they go to with questions? Having a single point of contact from the immigration provider and from the company can be helpful. Sometimes it's more spread out and they're going to their manager or they're going to the recruiter or they're going to HR. But this is actually something that should be thought out ahead of time. People ops, HR typically answers questions on company policies. However, you can lean on your immigration provider to be the point of contact for a lot of these matters. You don't need to have everything on your shoulders. Immigration providers can also share company policy if they have that at their fingertips. So many functions related to communication can be handled by outside counsel. At the same time, you want to know that your employees are being taken care of and that they're getting that white glove treatment that they need. So just really careful communication with the counsel and making sure everybody's on the same page about how fast do we get back to them. What is our style of communicating with employees? Another piece is what employees see with respect to their immigration. So milestone updates. Is there a platform where they can go into and see where their case is? Can they see what's happening next? Who the owner is of the next step in their immigration process, what the timeline is for each of those steps. A sophisticated platform will show that, but it can, it can elevate the experience, especially during a stressful immigration process. So whatever it is, proactive communication is a must, whether you're able to provide that on a self-service basis via the service provider's platform or have them as the point of contact to answer those questions. It is important to give them the information that they need so they're not bugging you all the time. And to that point, having some sort of self-service hub, it doesn't need to be a landing page on your website. It doesn't need to be something super advanced. It could be PDFs, it could be materials. It can take a number of different forms depending on the size of your program and what you're ready for. But it's really great to have something that they can just turn to and that you don't need to answer emails ad hoc about what your sponsorship policies are, what the general travel guidance is. However, they should talk to their attorney before they do any international travel. Some general FAQs. So having that, do lean on your immigration provider to help draft those resources for you because it can really save you some time. And then this slide also gives you sort of an idea of what the timeline is for an immigration case. I think that's part of the employee experience, but really the point is you want to give the employees as much visibility as possible into their program to the extent that you can with, under whatever your company's policies are. It's going to improve their experience and also make it easier on you. Is there anything you'd add to that, Aizada?
Yeah, I think just like if to summarize this page in a couple of sentences, employees, your most important stakeholders, so you need to make sure that their experience is really good. This just shows you like what stages of process they go through and what's their most frequent questions. You need to be able to answer those. But what also important to remember, you need to divide what's vendor responsible for and what you are responsible for. The worst scenarios is when you just become a router. You just like start triaging the questions. It's like they are, for example, emailing their attorney is not responding, and then you are triaging, you're escalating, and you're just lost in this game of like chasing your attorneys. So that's why it's like what we were saying, it's like SLAs and metrics are super critical and escalation paths are super critical so that if, for example, an attorney is not responding within 3 business days, that's not okay at all. So you have an escalation path to go to their partner and say, this is not okay, because that escalation is your job, but like making sure that your employees get answers is not your job. That's your immigration attorney needs to make sure that your employees have all of their legal questions answered. Your job is to answer company policy, right? Like if they ask, hey, like, can I have this exception? This is when you go to their business unit manager and discuss, but like understanding who does what to make sure employees experience is great. That's your job, but not getting involved in day to day. And then we move on to the next one. It's like we've talked about that the building pillars of excellent immigration program is making sure you have compliance and control, employee experience, and the third one is executional architecture. And this is where it's like it actually gets a little bit more complex, because what you need to build in order the program actually scales without breaking, and you're building something foundational based on systems versus something that is held by human willpower, because as the company scales, that will be really hard to do. So it has 3 pillars. It's vendor management that we've alluded to before, stakeholder alignment, and program intelligence. So vendor management is basically it's like, what do you need to have in place to make sure your vendor and you know exactly what metrics are you tracking. Also, a recommendation, do not get too comfortable with your vendor. There's so many immigration law firms out there. Keep them always on their toes. Make sure that like they know they need to deliver their best service at all times, and be always on the outlook to learn about others. That's what you're doing today by joining this webinar, so thank you. The second piece about stakeholder alignment. Your most important stakeholder is your employee, but also remember it's recruiting, HR, finance, all of them are super important. You need to know what they need, what they want, what are their KPIs, and help them get there, right? So that's how you make them happy. You need to understand what each of them care for and how you can make them happy. And if you focus on these important things, then your job is being done well. The third piece about the program intelligence, do not just track tasks or like, for example, visa expiration dates in a spreadsheet. You need to know more than that. You need to turn immigration from just a reactive cost center to something that functions as a system and that plans ahead and earns internal credibility. If you have a platform that has everything on display, everyone can look easily, that's how you earn your credibility within the company. And then I will not pause too much on vendor management and stakeholder alignment, because vendor management, you just need to focus on most important metrics. If you have SLAs, right, like email response SLAs, how many days, how many hours is okay. If it's a case marked urgent or VIP, the response needs to be received within 5 hours or the same day. If it's like regular case, this is the latest is acceptable. Like what's the out of fee rate? Like how are you handling out of fees? There's so many things that you can manage with the vendor, but most important is like the responsiveness, sticking to the SLAs, and make sure all of your SLAs are in your legal agreement and it's guaranteed and it's their liability that they need to deliver on. For example, with stakeholder alignment, just understanding what are the metrics everyone cares for, what recruiting team cares for, what a finance team cares for, and then you actually deliver on those metrics. And then I'd like to focus on the program intelligence. Like this is the dashboard that every people ops leader must have. So the point of reporting is not just to create more charts, but it actually to be able to make real good decisions, who's at risk, who needs budget, where the vendor is slow, and where the managers need education. So if you can see, you should be able to see how many active cases you have, how many people are expiring in the next 120 days. You track both authorization to stay, authorization to work. You must know this data like at any given time. What about the SLAs? Is your immigration law firm is tracking against the SLAs they promised, right? How many active RFEs you have? What's the strategy there? Like, what's the likelihood of like these RFEs getting approved? Then, how many, for example, green card candidates you have in the pipeline that you need to make a decision on? You need to know visa population by status. Like, you gotta know your numbers. These are your numbers. This is your program. You need to know the numbers, and you need to like basically have an understanding like what are the big next decisions that we need to make, like, and who is the owner of it, right? Like, when is the renewal file? When is the perm kickoff? What are the travel risks, right? Like, you need to know who owns it and like what are the decisions that needs to be made. Like core APIs, some of the core APIs that you need to track, like how much it is taking time to file. This is super important. You cannot just have like, you need to know what's the average time to file H1Bs for transfer, for example, so that you can also let the recruiting team, business unit managers know. These are the numbers that everyone should know. What are the company RFE rates? How do they track against the RFE rates of the market? You gotta know. What are the approval rates? You need to know what are the market approval rates, because that just lets you compare your immigration program with the market. What's the employee NPS? Are you running surveys? Is your immigration law firm running surveys? Are you running surveys? But someone gotta be running those surveys. At Alma, we run the surveys and then we share it with our clients, but someone's gotta be running those NPS, those surveys to understand it's like how your employees are doing, because you don't want to find out about when it's too late, when they escalate to your CEO. The SLA adherence, like how many SLA delays you have, why they're happening, what are the measures you have in place to make sure things don't happen again. And of course, compliance. No one lapses in their work authorization because it just exposes you to a lot of legal risk and liability. And then these are just like common risks that create real risks. Maybe, Jihan, I want to make sure that we reserve time to respond to questions. Maybe I just quickly go over this. This is like everything what we've discussed, no written policy, all the mischanged events, right? Like people are changing their jobs, you're not tracking, you do not know if it even ties back to the original wage determination that you've gotten, right? Visitor status used loosely. People on B1, B2 or visa waiver travel is just like, it's treated as a shortcut to work. Authorization lapses, very critical. Late green card planning, vendor black spot. You don't know like what vendor is doing. You're not tracking them. No periodic self audit. You don't know like if you are like, if your leadership asks you how confident you are our immigration program is compliant. At all times, you should be able to say 100% confident. If you cannot, then you got to do periodic self audits and audits with your law firm to make sure that you're on track. And another risk we see that when you try everything to do yourself, you literally one human being, you cannot do it all. That's why you have immigration law firm. Doing it all yourself, it just creates bigger risk for the company. And then just want to focus on like practical takeaways from this today call. We will share these materials with you. Just let us know if you need them. But basically what you want to do in the next 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days, right? First, you want to make sure that you have a stable program. You need to create one source of truth for statuses, expirations, check your data integrity. Can you trust all of the data, like information about the expiration statuses and whatnot? You need to make sure you have access to underlying documents. You need to identify employees expiring in the next 120 days. You need to make sure you have a sponsorship policy and contact map. The next 60 days, you're like, okay, so we need to make sure we have all the vendor metrics, right? We need to make sure that we audit all the paths and LCAs. We need to make sure what's in employee experience and who runs NPS service. And for the 90 days, you're like, okay, you need to build executive dashboards. You need to forecast. You need to train. You need to make sure that you manage your stakeholders better. We can share all of this with you, but today, leaving this webinar, you need to ask yourself, what's the biggest immigration bottleneck in your program right now, and how can you address it? And don't do it by yourself. Rely on your immigration vendors. Ask more from them. Always keep asking. You don't ask, you don't get it, right? So keep asking for more, because there are immigration vendors that can do a lot for you. If your immigration vendor is not doing it, come talk to us. And how Alma can help, real quick. So it's attorney-led AI assisted, which means that we in the back end empower our attorneys to be 10x more efficient, to make sure that attorneys actually spend a lot of time with you, understanding what you need, what your program needs, what the company needs, and how to help you basically to do your job better. We own everything end to end, and everything that we've talked about, compliance, everything we've talked about, the risks, we actually care for it. We are very thoughtful about it, and we own those things. And then clarity at every step is that you and your employees, everyone, will have access to all the dashboard, KPIs, metrics, everything what we've mentioned. And we actually track the NPS score. NPS score means Net Promoter Score, which means is that this 86 essentially means that 9 out of 10 employees that we work with are strong supporters of Alma, and they share their experience with other employees at other companies, saying like, my immigration experience was great. Hope this webinar was helpful. If any of you are interested in getting the materials, talking to Alma, please reach out and we can share and have discussion about your immigration program and how you can make it stronger and scalable as the company grows. Thank you so much for everyone who stayed until the end. Really appreciate your time and attention. I know there are always competing interests. Really appreciate you joining our webinar. Thank you so much, Jihan and Joanne too.